Hello, everyone. I also am in Houston, Texas. I've lived here all of my life, and my story really begins way back in 1960 when I was born, and I was born into a very traditional Jewish family. My father practiced dentistry, and my mom stayed home with me and my two younger sisters, and it was just a very traditional childhood. I have to say I was always very skeptical about any type of discussion or thought of the afterlife. In fact, I didn't think about it very much because it's not something I believed in. I went off to college. Well, my childhood was very uncomplicated, except for one thing that was very complicated, which I'll get into in a little while. But I was very close to my grandparents. They were a big part of our family life. And when my grandmother died, that was in 1987. I was 27 years old, and I was in the room with her when she passed away. And it's the first time I had ever seen someone actually die, and had been that close to the experience. And my dad and my mom's sister, my aunt, were in the room with me, with grandma when she died. And as she took her last breath, all three of us, my dad, my aunt, and myself, turned and looked at the upper back corner of the room. And then the three of us looked at each other as if to question what we were looking at up there. And we never discussed it afterwards, but I think we all kind of knew that grandma's soul had left her body and was somehow suspended up near the ceiling of the room. And that really was my first, it was just kind of a thought in the back of my mind that maybe there is something that happens after we die. Maybe there is something more to this life and death thing. And so that was kind of in my mind. Just 2 months after that, my husband at the time, I was married and I had two young children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, both boys. And my husband was out of town on business, but we were coming up on the first anniversary of the death of my grandfather. The grandmother that had just passed away, it was her husband that had died a year earlier. And in Judaism, the anniversary of the death of loved ones is an event, and at services, their names are read out loud each year on the anniversary of their death. So here it was 2 months after my grandmother had passed away, and my husband's out of town, and I got my boys dressed, and we were going to go to services and to hear my grandfather's name read. And I was very proud of the way I looked that night because I was wearing a very a new outfit. It was an outfit that I had spent way more money than we had available on, and I guess I had somehow thought that by going shopping, it was going to make me feel better. I was struggling with the grief over my grandmother, and I had found this suit. It was black and white, and these matching shoes that were absolutely stunning shoes. So I looked what I thought was good that evening, and before we left the house to go to services, I wanted to take a picture of myself and the two boys. And I had just gotten a new camera, and I set it up on the tripod and took a picture of us. Even though we were late for services, I still stopped to take the picture. And then we went on. I got the boys in their car seats, and we drove to the synagogue, which happens to be right across the street from where Jeff Kripal's office is at Rice University. And that doesn't have anything to do with the story, but I just think it's kind of a strange coincidence. Anyway, we pulled into the parking lot, and it had been a bright sunny day all day that day. And as soon as we pulled into the parking lot, it started to rain. And by the time I pulled into a parking space, it was storming. It was a torrential downpour. Excuse me. And I didn't want to sit in the car and wait for it to pass because we were already late for services, and I didn't want to miss the reading of my grandfather's name. So I told my oldest son, Jeremy, to get out of the car and to run to the awning at the door of the building and to wait there when he got there, and I would come with Andy, my 2-year-old. So Jeremy did that, and he made it there safely. And I climbed over the seat of the car, got Andy out of his car seat in the back, and then I grabbed my umbrella. And I always used to keep an umbrella in the car. I don't anymore. I don't use umbrellas anymore. But at the time I did. And I got Andy in my arms, opened the car door, opened the umbrella, and realized immediately that if I tried to carry Andy, it wasn't going to work. I had too much stuff in my hands. The shoes were high heels. I didn't want to fall and drop Andy. So I put him down, and I held his hand with my right hand, and I held the umbrella with my left hand. I pulled it down very close to my head, and we started out across the parking lot. And we got a few steps, and suddenly there was like it felt like a puff of cool air went by, and it kind of made me shiver. And I looked at my hand, and I thought, this really isn't smart to be carrying an umbrella. I mean, there was lightning. I could see it flashing in the distance. But I thought, maybe I shouldn't have brought an umbrella. And as I thought that, a tiny little fork, there was a lightning bolt, and there was a little tine that came off the bolt that hit the tip of my umbrella. And that first little finger did not knock me out, but it did paralyze my arm and my hand around the shaft of the umbrella, the metal shaft. And I did notice that my wedding ring was touching the metal shaft of the umbrella, and I couldn't let go because my hand and my arm were paralyzed. And then a larger bolt hit the tip of the umbrella, and that did knock me out. I thought it was very loud. I later learned that it burst my eardrums and Andy's eardrums, and I knew that Andy was screaming. He had both of his hands clamped to his ears, and he was standing there screaming, this 2-year-old. And I could not understand why he was screaming. I wasn't in any pain. And Jeremy, who had been under the awning at the door of the synagogue, ran back out to us, and he was screaming also, and grabbed his brother and started pulling him to the building. And I followed them. I wasn't going to stay out there. I followed them into the building. And as soon as we got inside, there was a man walking by. We were now in the lobby of the synagogue, and services were well underway. And there was a man walking by who I guess had been in the restroom or something. And it was someone we knew. And he came over immediately to the boys to find out why they were screaming. And I could not understand why he wasn't talking to me. I mean, I'm standing right there and he's not saying anything to me. He's crouched down talking to the boys. And Andy is still screaming with his hands to his ears. Jeremy is crying and screaming. And my thought at that time was, wait a minute, where is my umbrella? I knew I had an umbrella in my hand. So I turned and I looked back out the window, and there were windows in the doors, and I looked out there and I saw in the parking lot my umbrella, and it was smoking. It was the skeleton of an umbrella, the metal skeleton, and it was smoking. And my eyes kind of shifted to the right about 20 feet, and there was just a heap on the ground there. And I realized it was me. I'm standing inside the building, looking outside at myself in a heap on the ground. And I mean, that is very disorienting. Nothing I had ever experienced before, anything like it. And I noticed immediately that the soles of my shoes were gone, and my feet were like sticking out of the base of my shoes. And I was very upset about the shoes. They by far were my favorite shoes, and probably still are to this day. So where I was in the lobby of the building, I looked down at my feet to see if my shoes were okay. And sure enough, they were fine. They were perfect. The only problem was they weren't touching the ground. I was hovering about, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches above the ground. And I was just extremely disoriented. By then, the man that had come to help the boys had gone into the back of the services and had asked for help. And so it's a large Jewish synagogue near the medical center, which is a major medical center. So there were a number of physicians there that night, and they all started coming toward the back. And I figured, well, you know, the boys are okay. They're taken care of. I knew my family was there. So I decided to go back outside and kind of survey what had happened. So I went back out. I guess I don't know how I got there. I just thought I need to go see. And then I was there, and I'm looking down at myself, and it just struck me suddenly that I had been completely wrong, because here I was, conscious, and I'm looking down at myself and I'm thinking, I'm dead, but I'm still thinking, I'm still conscious, I'm still aware. And I thought, well, I'm just going to go with this and see what happens. And a light appeared to my right and kind of above me. And it wasn't a tunnel, and it wasn't like a defined round light. It was kind of a diffuse glow. And I knew that it wanted me to follow it. So I did. I just went toward that light and I followed it. And it led me to what I've come to call the garden. It was a garden, although it was not a garden like anything, no garden here on earth. And the feeling when I got to the garden was just overwhelming love, unconditional, overwhelming love, unlike any love I've experienced on earth. And I think anyone that has children, is a parent, knows what unconditional love is. I certainly did and still do. But this was it was different, and it was, I hate to say deeper, but it was deeper. And then a voice told me to sit. There was a bench, and it was a very ornate, elaborate bench, and told me to sit. And the voice was the voice of my deceased grandfather, whose name we had been at services to hear read on the anniversary of his death. And I know it was him. He had a very distinctive French accent in life, and it was his voice and his accent. And so, when you're in a place that you think is heaven, and you are dead, and your dead grandfather is telling you to sit on an elaborate bench, you sit. So I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, this bench just kind of morphed around me. It conformed to, I really hate to use the term my body, because I didn't have a body really, but it just cradled me. It was so comforting and so comfortable. And so I sat there, and he sat next to me, and he immediately told me that he was going to answer any questions I had, but he was going to put the information directly into my mind. He wasn't going to speak out loud anymore, because he didn't want to disrupt my experience. And there were other sounds going on in the garden that he didn't want to disrupt. There was music. It was not a type of music that exists here on earth that I know of. It sounded almost computer generated, but even that, I don't know that a computer could generate the sound that I heard. There was also the sound of running water. I saw that there was a little stream or a brook, and there was water running over some rocks in the brook. And it was just a gorgeous scene. It was there, the colors there, the flowers just were exploding with color. And the colors were unlike any color I've ever seen on earth. It must have been some other spectrum or something. And so I'm trying to take this all in, and the questions, as soon as I thought a question, which there were so many, I had the answers. It was just an immediate knowledge of whatever I was thinking about. I knew. I just knew it. And so this went on for quite a while. It actually went on for 2 weeks. And I know that because, not because there was a calendar or a clock there, but there was a sort of a calendar, in that there were these orbs in the sky, in the space above us. They were kind of violet color, but it was much more intense than the violet that I know of here. And the way these bodies were orbiting, I knew that time was passing, and I just understood. It wasn't something I had to learn. I just instinctively understood how to read the orbit and the movement of these moon bodies, and I knew how much time was passing. this is kind of interesting to me, because one of the things I learned there is that time itself is not linear. So it's kind of funny that I had a way of determining linear time while I was there. I think that part of the reason I was able to do that is because it was the only way I had to decode the information I was being given. I had to think of it in linear terms. And even when I came back, thinking back on things, I had to look at it in linear terms in order to understand what had been told to me and what had happened to me. So anyway, that was a big component to the entire near-death experience, was gaining the knowledge that time is not linear. And that's been one of the most jarring lessons that I learned. And not in a bad way, just different, a different way of thinking. I mean, in no way had I ever studied physics or any kind of quantum mechanics, anything like that. My background in education was in business and then law school. I had never studied anything like this. So I sat there for 2 weeks, taking in all of the information I was being given. I did see other people in the distance, and everyone was paired up with, I guess, a guide, like the guide that I had. And I never did turn to look at him. My companion there, I never looked at him. I don't think I was supposed to see him, because I think it would have been very emotionally disturbing to me to see my grandfather. And in fact, I don't think it was my grandfather. I think it was God using my grandfather's voice to put me at ease and not frighten me. And so I shouldn't have seen my grandfather, and I didn't turn to look, because had it been God, I think I would have been just overcome. So I didn't look. The only thing I did look at was I noticed that all the other people there were beautiful. They were perfect. Everyone looked to be about 18 years old and in perfect health, perfect condition. Everyone was dressed in what I would call street clothes. So I thought, well, I'm not 18 years old. Maybe I wonder what I look like. So I looked down at my hand to see what the burn on my hand looked like from the lightning. And my hand was perfect. The skin looked much younger than my actual 28 years. And I did notice that I wasn't wearing a wedding ring. I didn't know where my wedding ring had gone. But my hand looked perfect. So I guess I must have kind of looked pretty well also. So one of the things that I was told while I was there was that I could stay there if I wanted to. And if I chose to do that, I would have to follow the light that had brought me there had moved behind a range of mountains in the distance. And I could see it there in the distance. And there was a path that led to these mountains. And if I decided to stay, my companion told me he would escort me down this path and over the mountains. And if I decided to go back, he would help me go back also. And so a lot of our conversation centered around making that decision, whether to stay or go back. And in order to make the decision, he gave me a lot of information about my life, my family, what the future might hold. One of the things he told me was that if I came back, I would be having a third child, a girl this time, and that she had already selected me and her dad as her parents. And that was the first time I had ever even thought about reincarnation. I mean, I figured if she had chosen us, then she had been there before and was somehow coming back again, which was an interesting concept to me at the time. And so we talked about this for a little while, and finally, after 2 weeks, I decided I'm going to go back. And he told me that that's fine. I'll help you back, but I need to let you know that there's going to be a lot of pain involved. 2 things. Number one, you're burned from the lightning, and that will be painful. And the second thing is that in order to get you, your soul that you are here in the garden, in order to get you back into your body, I'm going to need to squeeze you really tightly. It's going to feel bone crushingly tight. And sure enough, he did. He helped me back, and it was very painful. It felt like all my bones were being crushed, and I opened my eyes there on the concrete in the rain, and again was very disoriented because I thought I had been gone for 2 weeks when in fact it had probably been about 2 minutes. And there were people coming out to help me from the synagogue. So that's how the entire near-death experience unfolded. Then I had to spend about 3 months in bed because I had burns on the bottom of my feet where the lightning had left my body. And so it was painful to walk. So I spent a lot of time in bed and sleeping. And about 3 months in, I was to the point to where I could walk. And I had a dream one night. And it was a dream about a woman who I didn't know, but that I knew of. I had heard someone talk about her, a mutual friend of ours. And this mutual friend was a pharmacist. And I thought, and in this dream, the woman passed away. And I thought, when I woke up, it was like, why? First of all, why did I dream about her? Second of all, why tell me if she died? I don't even know her. And immediately I knew that the purpose of that dream was not to tell me about this woman's death, but to tell me that I could know about it before it happened. And so I thought, okay, I need to find out if this really happened. I got in my car, I went to the pharmacy where this pharmacist worked. I went up to him. He looked kind of sad. He was filling a prescription. And I said, is everything okay? And he said, oh, I'm just sad because so-and-so passed away this morning. And it was the woman I had the dream of. And I got back in my car and I'm like, okay, why? And ever since then, these things happen to me. I can know about, and it's not that I can pick and choose what I know. It just comes to me. Sometimes I'll know about plane crashes before they happen, which is extremely upsetting. The first one that I remember knowing about, I had a nightmare in which I saw a plane crashed in water, and on the broken pieces of the plane, I saw WA. I thought it was World Airways. This was back in, 1980. No, it was 1996. And 1996. I knew how many people were on the plane. I knew there were 230 people on the plane. I knew the flight number. It was flight number 800. And I called my mom the next morning and I said, I had this horrible nightmare. It was World Airways, flight 800, 230 people. None of them survived. And I figured that was the end of it. The next morning, my mom called me and she said, turn on the TV, quick, quick. I turned it on, and they're reporting that it wasn't World Airways, it was TWA. That TWA Flight 800 had crashed in the ocean, 230 people on board, no survivors. And it was about 10 days. I had told my husband about it also, and then told him he had been at work when I heard about it, and I called him and I said, turn on the news, and he did. And it was about 10 days after that he moved out of the house. And this was about 9 years after my near-death experience, and he really was disturbed by some of the precognition stuff that I had, and he didn't want to hear about it anymore, and we ended up divorcing 9 years after the near-death experience. Another nightmare I had was in my second husband, Matt, and I were vacationing in Jerusalem, and I had a nightmare. And at that point, I was sending myself emails. When I would wake up from the nightmare, I wanted it date and time stamped, just to prove to myself that I was hearing about these things before they happened. And so I had a nightmare. I sent myself an email on our laptop there in our hotel room in Jerusalem. And it was about 7 hours later that it happened. I told Matt. He woke up and he said, what are you doing? I said, I had a nightmare. He said, oh, what was it? And he knew about my precognitions and things. And I told him I saw people. It was an airplane that landed. It didn't crash, but it landed on water, and there were people standing on the wings of the plane. And the next morning, sure enough, we're at breakfast, and there was the landing on the Hudson. It was where they landed on the Hudson River, and everyone went out on the wings, and there were no fatalities. It was like a miracle. And so things like that continued to happen, and still to this day continue to happen occasionally, not as frequently anymore as they used to, but they do still happen. Jeff, I don't know how we are for time right now, but I don't know if I have time to go into the necklace and the phone call. Probably not.
Probably not both of them, but maybe just mention the phone call story quickly, because
Okay.
you have a minute and a half basically.
Oh, okay. In the spring of 1990, shortly after my near-death experience, my phone rang. It was a landline in the middle of the night. My husband, it woke both of us up. I didn't want to answer it because I figured it's probably bad news. Nobody's going to call me in the middle of the night with good news. So my husband kept telling me, answer the phone, answer the phone. It was on my side of the bed. So I did. And when I answered, it was my grandfather. It was the French accent and all. And he was calling to tell me a piece of information that my mother needed, a piece of family information, something she needed to know. And I said, well, why are you calling me? Why don't you call her? And he said, well, I've tried to reach her and she can't hear me. But ever since you were struck by the lightning, you can hear me. And so he said, please call her. I said, I will. I said, I need to tell you something. And he said, you don't need to tell me. I already know you're pregnant and it's a girl. And I said, his voice started getting faint. And I said, please don't hang up. And he said, well, this takes a lot of energy for me to make this call. And I need to go now. And he hung up. My husband he had been saying the entire conversation, who is it? Who is it? Who is it? And I didn't want to tell him really. And finally, after we hung up, he said, "Who was it?" And I said, "My grandfather." And he said, "Which one?" And I told him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to sleep." And he did.